Today's episode is brought to you by Surfshark. If it feels like the internet is getting more dangerous by the second, and feel that hackers have more ways to target you, trackers are following your every move, and malware is hiding all over the web, luckily there is a solution. You can get a VPN. Essentially, it will hide your location and make you more difficult to identify and target. But privacy and security are not all that Surfshark has to offer. If you have a VPN, you will forget all about those pesky geo restrictions. Everything from news sources to social media apps that have become unavailable to you because of your location. All you need to do is change your virtual location and access all the entertainment you want safely and securely. And the best part is you can try out Surfshark completely risk-free because they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. So get Surfshark VPN at surfshark.deals/TTD. And don't forget, enter promo code TTD for 83% off and 3 months free. But now, on with today's show. And I have a great guy called Derek Osgood on the podcast who has a great story to share, which led to him being the founder and CEO of a company called Ignition, which is a collaborative go-to-market platform that is assisting product and marketing teams and helping them bring new goods to market quickly and more efficiently. And he has a great backstory too. He spent over a decade leading and scaling marketing teams at big brands such as PlayStation, BBVA and Rippling, to name but a few. And he's also launched over 100 products working as a product marketeer that have collectively generated $1 billion in revenue. Wow. But today, he's going to be chatting about the key elements to a successful product launch, what the future of software looks like for product and marketing teams, and what are the biggest mistakes companies make when launching products, and also how to avoid them. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to San Francisco, where Derek Osgood is waiting to share his story. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Derek, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Ignition, which is basically a platform designed to help product marketers and product managers plan, execute, and measure go-to-market processes and launches holistically. So we actually do a bunch of embedded workflows around customer research and competitive intel that all feed into launch planning and then help automate a lot of the internal comms and stakeholder management involved in the process, while also help you actually kind of generate bigger, better launch plans. But my background, basically, I historically, come from a product marketing background. So I've run product and marketing teams kind of throughout the Valley. Early on, in my career as a PM at PlayStation, launching big AAA games. I've done a bunch of early stage tech stuff in every possible vertical you can imagine, running marketing teams and messaging and payments and field service management. Ended up joining BBVA's fintech innovation arm in SF. Ran marketing across a whole portfolio of fintech companies that we had either, created and incubated in-house or, had invested in or acquired. And then, most recently, I was running the product marketing team at Rippling, where I was one of the first, couple dozen folks there and helped them scale up from pretty much nothing to about 20 million in ARR before taking off to go start Ignition.
Love that. And if I was to take you back even further, even before the PlayStation days, can you remember what lit the passion for tech with you? What inspired you and what put you on this path that you're ultimately on right now? There must have been some kind of moment, right?
Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, I think my parents always joked that when I was like 4 years old, they were asking me, what I wanted to be when I grow up. And I would always tell them I want to be Bill Gates. And, I don't know where that came from, to be honest. I think, I probably heard somebody talking about like Bill Gates and I was like, oh, that seems interesting. But I think, where my real passion for it ended up like really coming from was I've just always been kind of like a gadgets geek. And like a lot of it came from, early days consumer electronics and, me just kind of geeking out on, all the old, like, so dating myself here, but like old Sony Walkman stuff. And I just loved kind of new things. And I've always, kind of wanted to be, somewhat on sort of the bleeding edge of like whatever is new at any given point, and tech felt like the best, place to do that. So I was a big gamer growing up, and I think that also probably played a role. And I think that's a pretty common story among techies. You see a lot of people who their original interest in tech actually got inspired by video games, and obviously I parlayed that into actually working in video games for a little while. But I think that, I can't quite put my finger on it, but it was something to that effect.
And has that stayed with you? Do you still enjoy gaming and getting those new gadgets and those must-have new things? Is that still with you?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely still a gamer. I definitely don't have as much time for it as I used to, unfortunately. Perils of starting a company is you kind of lose the free time to spend on video games. But I definitely still love games, and I think the passion for tech, can in general continues to remain super strong. And I think as you probably heard in my background, like I've kind of jumped between a bunch of different verticals within tech, and part of that is I think this kind of like ongoing fascination with different business models and different different areas of technology, and like seeing how technology can kind of enable all sorts of different parts of the world. So I think it's definitely stuck with me.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that. And it's funny how you just don't have time anymore. I'm the same. When The Last of Us 2 came out, I know most people with time on their hands could complete it in a couple of days. It took me about 4 months. I absolutely loved it, but you just don't have that time to throw into something like that, do you?
Yeah, totally. It used to be, I would bang out a new God of War game in over a weekend, and these days it's probably a multiple month ordeal. But it's a good way to like turn. I love games because I think tech can be a demanding world to be in, and it's a really good way to kind of just relax and like turn your brain off and lose myself in kind of a story. I'm a big narratives are a big part of my fascination with games and entertainment in general, and so I think they're a good way to dig into that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And from there, of course, you spent over a decade leading and scaling marketing teams at brands like PlayStation, BBVA, and Rippling that you mentioned. But you've launched over 100 products working as product marketer that have collectively generated over $1 billion in revenue, which is just phenomenal. That must look great on your resume. But how did you prepare on your journey, especially to being the founder and CEO at Ignition?
Yeah, it's so funny. I think this is definitely not. It's not the traditional path that most CEOs follow these days. But I think when I was originally deciding to go into marketing, it was actually because I wanted to be a CEO in tech. Like I believed that marketing was an area that would really prepare me exceptionally well for that role. In part because I think I've always kind of viewed marketing as the traditional kind of like CPG brand management definition of marketing, where it is really like holistic product management. And I think, I figured that it would give me this really broad scope where I had visibility across all the different moving pieces within an organization, because I think, one of my favorite old Peter Drucker quotes is, companies have two functions. They have innovation and marketing. And, I was like, I'm probably not going to be a very good engineer. So I might as well look at the other side of the house and get visibility across the whole company. And I think, the way that I prepared myself, basically, I went to school for marketing and entrepreneurship. So I double majored in college at USC in brand management and entrepreneurship. Got kind of like both sides of the coin there. And then I ended up, joining, actually, I kind of sold my soul a little bit and worked in tobacco for a year. Coming out of school, working for Altria. But I think, the interesting thing about that was it gave me exposure to what is, realistically as however you feel about cigarettes as a category, Marlboro is one of the best like branding stories probably in history. And so I got exposure to the way that like, a really, really well-defined and established, branding team works. And that then, I jumped into PlayStation, and, PlayStation, I got to experience full P&L ownership at a relatively young age, leading, relatively large brands in God of War, Beyond Two Souls, Resistance, like a bunch of different PlayStation brands that, are pretty meaty. And I got, again, just, I have always kind of optimized for like breadth of exposure and, having a high level of impact and ownership, regardless of whether or not I was like actually prepared for it at the time. And I think, the roles that I had at PlayStation, because I was a true product owner, meant that I, my butt was on the line and I was the one who had to figure it out. But also, I had the support of a relatively large, high quality marketing organization that could teach me kind of the ropes as I was growing. And then, that's translated well to, all the work that I've done in tech since. I think I feel like it's given me a breadth of understanding of how both kind of like the brand and product marketing side of things, which, tends to feel pretty squishy when you're in tech, but is, ultimately where, high quality marketing strategy comes from, how that kind of marries to the growth marketing side of things and, much more performance driven activity. And I think that, because I've been able to kind of balance the two of those throughout my career, it's just helped me to really, have a good handle on how all this stuff fits together. I know that's kind of a hand wavy answer, but yeah.
And here in 2022, Ignition is known as a collaborative go-to-market platform that is assisting product and marketing teams in bringing new goods to market quickly and efficiently. Everything around your experience points to this. I can see how you've ended up where you are now, but can you expand on that and also the kind of problems that you solve for those teams with your technology?
Yeah, totally. It's funny because I think I talk about so product marketing teams in general are severely undertooled. There's really not very many tools built specifically for product marketing teams and even for product management teams. And I think the insight that I've come to the conclusion around with this problem is that part of that is because it's not like, growth marketing where you can say, oh, it's incredibly hard to like automate emails. And so there's one singular pain point that you can build around. And it is so acute that solving that one singular problem ends up solving for like a large swath of that person's role. I think when you talk about product marketing and product management teams, the go-to-market process is actually, it has different problems at different stages in the process. And there's really like 10,000 little paper cuts that all roll up to be a really excruciatingly painful problem. I think if I have to distill all of it down, like ultimately the biggest problem for go-to-market processes ends up being stakeholder alignment. You have so many different cross-functional teams that are involved in this process because you need to coordinate with the product team and make sure that, the thing is actually shipping on time, that customer insights are making their way into the product development process. You need to just know what's actually on the roadmap and coming down the pipe in advance. Then you need to coordinate with the whole marketing team and develop the marketing strategy itself, make sure that assets are getting developed and routed to the right team so that they end up on the right channels. You need to make sure that people know which of those assets and which information within the plan is actually approved for usage. And then you need to actually distribute that to, the sales and support teams to make sure that they actually know what's going on around this launch and how to talk about the product. And so, what we're doing, I think the big area that this falls down is oftentimes teams are kind of hacking this process together through a bunch of different documents and spreadsheets and project management tools. And none of the actual work happens in those places. They're creating various different variations of the plan for each of these different audiences. And they have to maintain like 4 or 5 different versions of the same plan because each of those teams kind of consumes the information differently and interacts with the information differently. And so what we're trying to do is give teams, kind of a single source of truth where you can really go, everybody across the team can drill, down to the level of altitude of information that they need and get very consumable, understandable versions of a go-to-market plan that everybody can align around and understand exactly what's going on with the plan But, the really cool thing that we're doing is, like I mentioned, and kind of alluded to earlier, the problem with, you can kind of do that in, a modern documentation tool. You can do that in a project management tool, but the problem with those is that the work itself actually happens elsewhere. You have a bunch of point solutions for things like conducting customer research and things like collecting competitive intelligence. What we're doing is we're actually baking into the documentation itself workflows to help you execute the work. So we have tools for conducting competitive research. So you can actually just, input a competitive link. We'll pull in a bunch of data about that company. You can build a battle card straight in our product that then pipes into the go-to-market plan. We allow you to send best practice-based pricing research directly from the product. So we'll send pricing studies, Van Westendorp, Conjoint, a bunch of different types of pricing research to customers that you can connect from your CRM or an uploaded list. We have dynamic plans that actually create themselves alongside you. So based on a bunch of inputs that you give us around what's your budget, what type of thing are you launching, we will cascade out a recommended go-to-market plan for you and give you recommendations around the channels you should be thinking about, around the assets you should be creating, the project plans you should be building. And then we even have, some asset generation tools baked into the product to allow you to actually write the copy. So we'll take your upstream messaging, run that through GPT-3, spit out copy for all the different channels that you're actually running promotion on. So we're embedding like the actual work involved in the process into the go-to-market planning process itself.
And as someone that's lived and breathed this space for a large portion of your life here, I've got to ask, what are the biggest mistakes companies make when launching products? And is there any tips or advice you can offer on how to avoid making those mistakes?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think there's a bunch. There's a stat that I think Gartner came out with a while ago that 89% of launches fail to hit their financial targets, and a lot of that comes from they just launched the wrong product. But the go-to-market process plays a big role in that as well. I think the single biggest problem that mistake that companies make, and this is especially true of startups and tech companies, is that they just kind of treat all launches the same. And the same, but they reinvent the wheel every single time they do their launch planning. But what I mean by that is they don't actually have a tiering system for identifying like which launches are going to actually move the needle and have impact for customers. And so they end up over-investing resources in too much planning and too much process for the really small feature releases, and too little planning and too little process and too little promotion for, the really large impactful products. And so, what we try and do is we give you kind of a tiered playbook for each of those different types of launches, and we cascade that out based on, how important or less important the product launch is. I think the other big one is they just underinvest in internal marketing around launches. So, obviously your team is kind of your best marketing channel at the end of the day. And oftentimes companies they do a really good job of setting up all of the customer facing communications around a launch, and they make this big splashy announcement, but the sales team has never been told how to tell the story around the product, or the support team doesn't know where all the videos are that explain the product itself. So nobody really knows how to actually communicate once customers start coming in the door around the product. And so, I think, and, you also end up missing a relatively large opportunity to have everybody across your company. If you have 1,000-person company, having, all 1,000 of those people posting about that new product on their social media accounts and sharing it with the customers that they know, you just massively amplify the impact that you can have in that launch. And companies just don't do a good enough job of even letting everybody know that something is launching. Like there's a surprisingly low amount of visibility in most companies around what the kind of calendar of upcoming launches looks like, around, which of those launches people should be, investing the most energy in promoting and paying attention to, and, how they should be talking about those products. So I think, those are probably the two biggest that I see. Also I think companies tend to kind of underinvest in just the marketing effort itself. Oftentimes they think that just posting a blog post and sending a customer email is sort of all you need to do in order to announce and get adoption for a product. And the reality is oftentimes you need, a much more concerted customer journey where you have multiple touch points post launch, where you're kind of continuing to re-promote that product to users so that they don't forget about it. And you need to be amplifying each of the channels with other channels. So, if you're doing an announcement and you're doing press, you want to make sure that you have search ads running at the same time that include or that are targeting some of the keywords that are likely to be searched for after somebody sees your press announcement, because you want to capture and harvest demand that the press announcements generating if people aren't clicking through directly from it. They may be searching for it, a couple days later, and you want to make sure that you've got those channels interacting together and, in really integrated fashion in order to actually maximize the impact that you're getting from that announcement.
And if we were to zoom out and look at the key elements to a successful product launch, is there a bullet point list there as well that you think are essential that people should take?
Yeah, so the key elements to a successful product launch, like I mentioned, is first having a plan. Like you need to actually have a defined strategic objective with KPIs that you're measuring that launch against. Oftentimes, companies are surprisingly bad at actually measuring whether or not a launch was successful or not because they don't set good measurement targets up front. Then you need to actually go through, you need to have a process, and you need to actually have a process for not just creating the plan itself and creating all of the different assets involved in that launch plan, but you need to have a process for communicating those plans at all the different milestones throughout the planning process to all of your cross-functional stakeholders. So you need to have really, really high degree of visibility and transparency around your plans. So whether that's our tool or whether that's another tool, you need to just make sure that everybody knows exactly where to go for information about new products. And oftentimes that's some kind of internal wiki. Sometimes, if you're housing these things in some big monstrous spreadsheet full of links, that's fine too. But you need to make sure that you have a single source of truth where everybody knows how to collect the information that they need in order to talk about a new product. And then you need to have set up milestone communications and actually set up automated touch points, whether they're automated or manual, with your sales and support teams. Make sure that they are as integrated in the process as the rest of the marketing and product teams. Like too often, sales and support and kind of the CX facing teams end up getting kind of forgotten and told at the last second that a launch is coming down the pipe. So, really companies need to make sure that they have that process in place for communicating internally. And then, make sure that you have gates at the last second, that you are making sure that you've done all of your, QA work, and you made sure that the product is working correctly, that you've gone through the user journey multiple times, and you really know that, the whole onboarding experience is very, very clean. Make sure that, you have done you've crossed your T's and dotted your I's on the legal front. Make sure that your comms team has been roped in and they've made sure that there's no, major pitfalls from a PR perspective around the launch. So really just make sure that, you have a process at the very last second in the launch process to gut check whether or not you're actually ready to launch. Because I see so many companies that end up just kind of shipping something and then they run into a bunch of backlash, in part just because they didn't have these checks in place. And they don't have to be super heavyweight. They can be, relatively light, but you just do need to gut check before you actually push out an announcement into the world that, the cross-functional teams that you may not have thought of have also had a chance to flag any issues.
And if I was to ask you to gaze into your virtual crystal ball, what do you think the future of software looks like for product and marketing teams? Are there any trends around that you're seeing or anything evolving?
I think the biggest one is just that there's going to be software for them. I mean, you're starting to see a little bit of this emerging on the product management side of things. So you now have platforms like Product Board starting to emerge for product teams to collect user insights, to house those user insights, and then, to create, product roadmaps and improve the visibility for all these cross-functional teams into what things the product team is building. I think on the product marketing side of things, like I think of product marketing teams as sort of, probably 5 to 10 years behind product teams in terms of the level of tooling that they have, where, my take, the product board was the original inspiration for our product. We wanted to build product board for product marketing teams. And so, I think you're going to start to see dedicated platforms emerge for these teams that help them to actually execute the work. I think the other big thing, as you probably could tell, from my description about our product, our product kind of comes off somewhat confusing when we're just doing a pure verbal pitch on it, in part because you have to do so many different things in order to solve for these roles because they are so multidisciplinary. The only way to actually build effective tools for them is to build kind of platforms and to build, relatively broad tools that do a lot of different stuff in one place, but that are centered around, a more linear workflow. So the workflow for developing products is fairly clear. You go conduct customer research, you write a spec, you put it on a roadmap, you then just, send a bunch of tickets to the engineering team. The engineering team works on building it. You track the progress and then you go and ship it. Go to market is somewhat similar, but obviously like each of those different stages, you need slightly different tools. And so I think you're going to see a bunch of platforms that have this series of micro tools kind of baked into them. And I think you'll start to see more and more use of AI and like lightweight business logic to try and automate some of the process here too. Like, for example, we do automated milestone communications for the sales team. So we can set up, scheduled internal comms that will happen at, all the different phases. Like when something ships to beta, we will distribute some subset of the planning information to the sales team that's important to them at that point. So you'll start to see a little bit more of that as well. But I think first it's just going to be, building tools for them in the first place.
I love that. And I'm conscious we've covered a lot in a short amount of time today. So do you have any client stories that you could share that would just bring to life everything that we've talked about, such as the problems and again, how you help teams with those problems too?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think my favorite one is actually one of our first users, Sandy, who she was the director of product marketing at Speckit. She ended up actually, she's now at a new company. But at Speckit, she was basically like a solo product marketer. And this is a really common problem for product marketers at earlier stage companies and even mid-stage companies, is that product marketing is oftentimes super under-resourced. And you just have so many different things flying around that it's really hard to even keep track of what your plan should look like. And so with her, we basically, gave her Ignition and she connected with her product team. She was importing the product roadmap into our tool, using it as her primary source of truth around what was coming down the pipe for the product team. So she didn't have to go sift through this really massive Jira instance to try and understand what was happening. And then she was building out all of her launch plans in Ignition. And I think what she told us was she really appreciated the kind of speed that it added to her go-to-market process and her ability to just launch more things faster, despite the limited resourcing that she had and limited personal bandwidth. Because we were actually cascading out those plans for her and not having to, force her to go through and configure some big, checklist and spreadsheet every single time she needed to create a new launch. We just kind of generated it for her and we were able to tailor her plans to her and customize them a little bit for her. And then, she felt like cross-functionally, it had just created a lot more alignment for their team internally. And they really just understood, everybody across the team understood exactly what was launching when. Everybody understood how to talk about those launches because she wasn't like juggling 50 different documents for those cross-functional teams. And I think we hadn't shipped actually a couple of the more recent tools that we've built around competitive intel, et cetera, which we actually don't even have customer stories yet for, because we just shipped them basically this week. But she basically was using us for all of her launch planning, and found much faster speed to market around her products, and was just experiencing a lot more stakeholder alignment cross functionally.
Awesome. And what's next for you? And indeed, Ignition, is there anything you can share about the road ahead?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, I think the biggest thing is going to be us just starting to now build in the tools and workflows that help you to actually execute the work involved in launch planning. So, we're continuing to flesh out our customer research tooling is kind of the first area that we're focusing on. So the next big wave of things that we want to build is actually tools around beta management and customer advisory board management, allowing you to really easily automate the recruiting process among your own customer list for subsets of those users who are interested in a specific product area, so you can build out customer advisory boards from those groups that then you can schedule ongoing meetings with, and automate a lot of the back and forth communication that happens with them to collect insights around new products before those things are actually in market. And then continuing to build out the automated asset generation that we have in our product as well. So today we have, like I mentioned, kind of automated copywriting, but we want to actually build out tools that help you to instantly generate case studies and like sales enablement materials. So, common assets can just get quickly generated within our product without you needing to do much work, aside from maybe setting up a template, upfront in our product. So we're going to continue this year is pretty much entirely focused on building out the tools that help product marketers actually do their job on a day-to-day basis. Now that we've got kind of all the core stakeholder alignment and documentation tools baked into the product.
Well, I think we've covered just about every aspect of your journey today. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask if you can share a song, movie, book, or anything that has inspired or helped you in your career, and share that with the listeners. And we can leave them on an inspirational note today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my favorite book for anybody in general, but like especially for product marketers and product managers, it's an oldie but a goodie, is Positioning by Al Ries. I think it's a classic marketing book, but it gives you a really good understanding of how to think through creating like singular value and identifying like what really differentiates your product from the other tools or products out there. So I think every single marketer should read it, and really, everybody who's in any kind of business should read it. And I go reference that, on a almost weekly or monthly basis.
Absolutely love it. And before I let you go, for anyone listening wanting to find out more information or even contact your team if they've got any questions, what's the best starting point?
Yeah. So our team, our website's haveignition.com, like we have ignition. We're kind of riffing on the space thing. And if you want to ever contact me, my personal email is derek@haveignition.com. And I'm happy to take emails directly. Oh,
brilliant. Well, I'll add all those links to the show notes so people can find you nice and easily, other than your email address. I'll let people work a little bit harder to get that. But, I've really enjoyed chatting with you about the key elements to a successful product launch, what the future of software looks like for product and marketing teams, and of course going through those biggest mistake companies make when launching products and how to avoid them. But more than anything, it was your story that brought everything to life. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and share that with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Man, this podcast is going to bankrupt me because Derek is another cool guy that I want to share a beer with. And between the guests and my promise to meet you if I'm in your town a beer, that's a lot of beer to buy, isn't it? Speaking of which, my first trip to the US in a long time after Dynatrace got cancelled in February in Vegas is now going to be Utah in March. And I'm going to be speaking about imposter syndrome at Sarah Elkin's No Longer Virtual event, where she connects people beyond the keyboard. So if you'd like to grab a beer with me at that event, or take me to the Skinwalker Ranch during some downtime and chill with a beer looking up at the stars looking for UFOs, again, let me know. But as always, I'm easy to get hold of. You can email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes. But don't just hit a connection request. Send me a message. Let me know where you listen to this show. But we've reached the end of another episode, so hopefully you will join me again tomorrow, nice and early, for another episode of Tech Talks Daily. But just a big, genuine thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.